Joining me now, our friend Dave Ehrenberg, former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida. So, Dave, if we go back to when the Republican-led committee dumped those 20,000 documents, it came hours after Democrats leaked 3 emails that mentioned Donald Trump's name. Does it surprise you that redaction slipped through the cracks and what should have gone into the redaction process?
Alex, the key is to redact the names of the victims and also to redact any child pornography or other images that the public should not see. And so that's it. That's it. I mean, then there are issues over whether the alleged co-conspirators should have their names redacted because there may be other court orders. When Ghislaine Maxwell went to trial, there were apparently potential co-conspirators who went to the court to say, my name should never be released as part of this investigation. And so you have to work through that. But that means that almost every other document should be released. And so that's why the redaction should be few and far between. And the Epstein Transparency Act makes it clear that you cannot redact any documents or any names because of embarrassment. So it should be game on. And I'm not surprised that the administration wants to drag its feet.
So the filings, Dave, they come in Attorney General Pam Bondi's latest push to release grand jury evidence from the Epstein case and the Maxwell trial. One survivor is quoted as saying she was unable to mentally and emotionally function or sleep. Another said the situation was, quote, very scary. And lawyers said transparency cannot come at the expense of privacy, safety, and protection of those who were abused, but the harm is already being done. So what duty does DOJ now owe survivors?
You know, the survivors have been let down by so many people, politicians over the years, prosecutors over the years. And so the least they could do is to work with them to make sure that they're part of the process. And they're doing that when they go to the judges about the release of grand jury documents. They're working with survivors. That's a positive step. But the survivors don't want the names of the co-conspirators to be redacted. They don't want Donald Trump's name to be redacted. They want the names of all these people out there who did this to them because they're not going to be able to do it on their own. They're worried about lawsuits. They're worried about physical threats. They need the government to stand up for them. So it's important, it's imperative for prosecutors to work with the survivors who have unfortunately been let down time and time again.
Yeah. So the judge in the Epstein case gave DOJ until noon Monday to provide a detailed description of materials subject to that 2019 protective order. The judge in the Maxwell trial asked for similar details and set deadlines of, I think it's December 10th. Is Bondi now hoping the court might give her some kind of cover to not release all the files in spite of the law that Trump signed?
Well, it is interesting because the law doesn't specifically say grand jury documents. The law talks about documents in the possession of the DOJ. Well, the grand jury records are not in the government's possession necessarily. They are in the court's possession, and the court has said we are not giving them up. Now, there's a new law in place, this Epstein Transparency Act, that does create a window to allow the release of these documents. But it's going to be up to the federal judges. And that's why the government is working with survivors to try to release them. And you may be wondering, Alex, for a government that has been reluctant to reveal the Epstein files, why are they pushing for the grand jury records to be released? And the reason is because they know that Trump's name is not in there when it comes to investigative files about Ghislaine Maxwell that led to her indictment. Same thing for Jeffrey Epstein. That's why they wanted these grand jury records released before the Epstein Transparency Act had ever been passed. So they're going to keep pushing that. But the key here is the files. The files are different than the grand jury records. They're going to push for the release of the grand jury records, but don't forget what's in over here in door B. That's the stuff that everyone wants.
Yeah, I think they're hoping that Americans don't, distinguish between the two and they're not listening to you explain what the difference is.